Okay, my friends, we have come to the Big Daddy Award, the big one. This is the best game of the decade. Now, we're going to give you all of our nominees and reward the winner. But first, let's hear from the community.
Zelda Breath of the Wild is my game of the decade for a lot of reasons. The game itself is fantastic. It's obviously really incredible in scope and scale, but beyond that, Zelda as a franchise is something that needs to be celebrated, and it's something that is a miracle of sorts because it can reinvent itself every iteration. It's a franchise that just keeps on going, and it doesn't matter what decade it ends up in, it's going to be probably one of the most innovative games you've ever seen.
So our nomination for Best Game of the Decade is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
For me, Legend of Zelda was the first Zelda that I've ever played. But with this, it was the first game I got on my Switch, and I was blown away.
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is the best game of the decade. I never really thought that Nintendo would create an open world Zelda game, and they've really pulled it off. There's a huge world in it to explore, plenty of things to do, and the story was terrific.
Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has got to be the best game of this decade, if not the century. Just brought open world gameplay to a new level. We never had anything like that before, where it all worked so well. Virtually every piece of it worked well.
For the best video game of the entire decade, that is a doozy of a category. But I think Adam and I finally came to a consensus. Not only is this game the greatest game of the decade, it's probably one of the greatest video games of all time.
Of all time?
All time. And we can, of course, only be talking about Roblox. Wait, what?
Game of the decade has got to be The Last of Us on PS3, remastered on PS4. This game has a great story. The gameplay is intense. It is a dark, melancholy world where you got the characters and the challenges that they're facing. They're trying to get from one area to the other. I don't want to spoil anything. The story is just really, really good. The gameplay is top notch.
Naughty Dog just built the perfect blend of stealth versus action, emotional tender bits versus object horror, the most interesting and complex protagonists in the history of gaming. I love this game, The Last of Us.
This has been a really eventful decade, and there have been a lot of games I could choose from, but if I had to pick one, I'll have to choose The Last of Us, because I don't think there's ever been a game that touched me to my core. There has never been a game that had story beats that literally kept me shocked to the point I couldn't move the controller for a few minutes just because I had to process what's going on.
There was one title that made me extremely emotional. It made me love the gameplay, but it made me take a step back and almost take a break after every chapter. Not because I hated it so much, but just because it was so difficult to take in at times. And that is The Last of Us. What an experience. I never knew Naughty Dog had that in them. You know, I knew the Uncharted games were fantastic and they were amazing, but you know, you can show someone the first 20 minutes of The Last of Us and they'll understand the journey that they're about to go through. It's just an emotional game. It's hard to put into words. And honestly, if you're out there and you're watching this and you have not played The Last of Us, I don't blame you. All right? But you have to go through that. You have to understand why video games are art, and The Last of Us is the perfect title to convince someone who's stubborn enough to think that they're not.
Victor Lucas, you're an evil man for getting us to choose just one game to represent an entire decade, but I'm going to give it a shot. There's something haunting about this game and the way that it ends, and it stayed with me, and I think about it all the time, and that is The Last of Us. It really elevated storytelling in games to heights that they have not seen before. The character study of Joel is fantastic. The ending is so unsettling and off-putting, and for me it rivals television and movies. It's really good stuff.
I have to say Skyrim. I have to say Skyrim because of how much time and energy and love I gave. Totally worth the collector's edition price. Totally worth the buying different versions of it for different platforms. Like, this was everything to me. This game meant, it opened my eyes to a life in video games because that's when I first started to review games, to get into it all, and it was because of this RPG that showed me that you could be whatever kind of gamer you want. I love that.
It's Skyrim. No questions asked.
I spent more time in this game traveling through so many different locales, looking for quests, finding quests, exploring caves, dungeons, caverns, castles, whatever. It's effectively endless, and I love it. I mean, I played it again in VR. It's 6 years later. It holds up great, even better in fact, and is by far the best game of the last decade.
My best game of the decade, as you can probably tell, is easily Minecraft. And while it did publicly release in alpha phase 10 years ago, it did actually officially release 2 years later. And since then, it's had infinite modding, infinite creativity, infinite glitches, and from it I've had infinite memories.
My recommendation for Game of the Decade is Spec Ops: The Line. This was a huge gamble by Jaeger, and I feel it paid off. This game defied expectations and really changed the landscape of gaming design. It addresses the fourth wall, it addresses you, it addresses so many commonplace aspects of gaming and totally turns it on its head and makes you think about them in a way that I didn't even think was possible in a game.
The game of the decade is Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. No, it's God of War. Of course it's God of War. Here's the thing. In a decade that had The Last of Us, that had Grand Theft Auto 5, that had Nintendo doing all types of things with Breath of the Wild, with Super Mario Odyssey, I really feel like God of War took the medium of what video games are and completely threw it out the window because they are now something different. It is a cinematic masterpiece. It is a gameplay masterpiece. Every single aspect of the game comes together to just form this perfect experience that I wish that I could mind wipe myself and be able to replay for the first time again and again and again.
I grew up playing God of War, and now myself having kids, 2 boys, you get that feel of like him being a father, and you really get sucked into that. The action's great, the storytelling is amazing. The game itself really brought a lot of people that grew up with Kratos back into like, oh my god, I'm getting all the feels. You went through the emotions, you went through everything of such a great game.
Easy. God of War 2018. I can't believe I'm saying it either. I'm somebody who has covered PlayStation my entire career, and I always hated Kratos. I thought he sucked. I liked the God of War games for the gameplay they were, but God was this guy one note freaking jerk that just yelled everything. So when God of War 2018 came around and was like, here is Kratos in a different part of his life with a son mourning his wife, you're like, what? And then to play this beautiful experience, to play this game that is so well acted, to play this game that has so many amazing set pieces, to play this game that is so much fun to play. The first time you call back the Leviathan axe, are you kidding me right now? God of War 2018 is a masterpiece. It is my favorite game of all time, not just the decade, of all time, because it merges what I love about games. It merges storytelling with graphics, with gameplay, and with a world I want to be in and be invested in, sit there and listen to the stories in the boat. Like, God of War is in another dimension. It's so good.
Easily has to go to Batman Arkham City. Not only is it a incredible achievement and it had a tough act of following up Arkham Asylum, but like the 16-bit superhero segments in Marvel Spider-Man, it inspired me to go and look back at old comic book games, which I've been playing, collecting, and reviewing for the better part of a decade. So not only is it an amazing achievement from Rocksteady, but it's also changed my life because I've really gotten into comic book and superhero games. I've met some amazing friends because of that.
I'm going to give it to GTA 5. I think GTA 5 is a game that has taken that open world genre and taken it to the next level and still retained a lot of fun. There's a lot of zaniness to it, but then there's, the Rockstar sharp satirical commentary on society.
Okay, you guys, here are the nominees for the Rocket and Raygun Award for the best game of the decade. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild from 2017, Batman Arkham City 2011, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt 2015, The Last of Us 2013, Red Dead Redemption 2010, Mass Effect 2 2010, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim 2011, Grand Theft Auto 5 2013, Super Mario Odyssey 2017, and God of War 2018. When I list off these nominees, it's almost like the definition of why video games are an amazing medium and why more people need to be playing these incredible works. These are some of the most transportive and rewarding experiences that you can have in any medium, and it's just amazing to see them all collected in a list like this. Let's talk about God of War from 2018. This is a fantastic reinvention that Cory Barlog led, and I'm sure there was a lot of hitting heads against the wall to figure out what the new take on Kratos and his tragedy was going to be, but they really aced it. They really got something that felt very special to play. It delivered on all of our desires for something sort of action-fueled, but then it also delivered emotionally. It was also an incredibly powerful game to play and connect with characters that we just were not expecting. A wonderful, wonderful experience, but not our best game of the decade. Super Mario Odyssey from Nintendo, where we had open areas to explore that would lead off into lots of little side missions and side levels, lots of secrets to collect, lots of customization to provide on Mario, which became my daughter's favorite part of the game, by the way, or all the incredible costumes you could put Mario into. So many homages and reimagined experiences from Mario through the ages. What a wonderful game Super Mario Odyssey is. It's so close to being the definitive Mario game, but that's really hard to call because there have been so many fantastic Mario games over the years. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game that has been on a bunch of different platforms, has existed and persisted across many years at this point. New content is still being generated for it. It was so massive and so epic in scale, and the fact that Rockstar created 3 different characters for us to jump into the shoes of in the story, the mechanics were super tuned. This is a way easier and a way more refined and enjoyable game to play. Wonderful, wonderful game. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, another one of these open world, play forever kind of experiences. This is another one where you can create a different character and go through everything again, and will all feel very different. Awesome achievement from the folks at Bethesda. Mass Effect 2, which came out in 2010, and really this is a nod to the entirety of the Mass Effect franchise, or that trilogy at least. By the time BioWare had gotten into Mass Effect 2, the refinements on the gunplay and the action elements of the game became a lot more rewarding. There was some clunkiness in the first Mass Effect game that was overcome in the sequel, but BioWare really kind of knocked it out of the park there with a franchise and a title that allowed us to kind of have it all, explore different planets and communicate with alien creatures and get into amazing gun battles and laser battles and have all kinds of fantastic technology and pilot cool vehicles. Amazing game. Red Dead Redemption in 2010 is also a worthy contender for the best game of the last decade. This is a game that had us riding for miles and miles and miles and had one of the most epic soundtracks that I still listen to this day. Definitely one of the best games of the last 10 years. And also better than its much more ambitious sequel, which came out last year, and which is still an incredible game. But it's amazing that Red Dead Redemption 1 from literally 10 years ago is still, in my opinion, better than its sequel. The Last of Us, which Naughty Dog blew us away with in 2013. The Last of Us was something else. It was very mature. It was very dark. Can't wait to see how Naughty Dog tops itself, if they can, with The Last of Us 2. But The Last of Us 1 will forever stand as one of the best games ever made, and absolutely one of the best games of this past 10 years. You can also say that about The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which CD Projekt Red completely blew away the world with. I don't know if everybody was expecting them to become this juggernaut RPG house, this scrappy team out of Warsaw, Poland. Even if the first 2 games, which had been successful, didn't really suggest that they were capable of something as expansive and rewarding as The Witcher 3 ultimately became. An open world game, all of the different encounters that you would have in towns and castles and caves and awesome spooky bad guys and this great sense of mysticism and magic. Really, really cool. And also so epic that it's a game that we've been able to kind of re-explore and dive into for the years since it came out. Batman Arkham City is on this list as well. It came out in 2011, and Rocksteady really impressed the world with what they had done with Batman Arkham Asylum. But I think that people were anticipating, a sequel maybe a little bit more confined than Arkham City ultimately ended up being. But at its core, this was a game that really let you feel like Batman in this massive city. And you could also get to play as Catwoman, and she had her own bag of tricks. So this was a real treat, especially for somebody as fanatical about the Batman lore as I am. That leaves us with one left on our 10 nominees for the best game of the last decade. And I think if you've been watching for a while, you probably know what we're going to give this award to. It's The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was a launch title for the Nintendo Switch, but it also came out on Nintendo's Wii U platform, which completely blows my mind because this does not feel like something that could cross over a couple of generations of hardware. I can remember feeling when I beat that first kind of plateau area that the game was already massive, and I realized that it was just this little tiny thumbtack on this enormous map that was left for me to go and explore and uncover the mysteries of and basically bring back to life, and protect, because it was overrun with all kinds of evil, and just a stunning, stunning accomplishment. The gameplay is airtight. The flexibility and the emergent sort of qualities of the physics gameplay, like throwing a rock down a hill and recognizing that it becomes a destructive force on the bad guys. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is our winner for the best game of the decade. And truthfully, it's my favorite game of all time. That's the big award there for the best game of the decade, but we have a lot of other categories stretched all across 2019 and the decade. So make sure you check out all of those videos, and thank you so much for watching this one.